snipers? If so, they're getting a lot of lead for them.
Alpha 6, 1 kilo over.
When the artillery barrage is over, the infantry will move back into the tree line, hoping to reestablish contact with the Viet Cong as the war goes on in War Zone C. George Page, NBC News, reporting from War Zone C.
It's been about 25 years since I filed that report from Vietnam. I can remember that day as if it were yesterday. In 1967 and 68, I reported on the war in Vietnam for NBC News. And what I experienced there is seared into memory. Most of us, in fact, remember Vietnam as a war, not a country. For 30 years, the land was bombed and burned, forests defoliated, wildlife habitats destroyed. But in 1975, with the war over at last, the land began to heal. This is a story of that process, of bomb craters turned into fish ponds, of new trees taking root in the dusts of war, of nature restoring the ancient beauty of Vietnam.
Nature is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you, your gas company, and America's natural gas industry, who have developed ways to run buses, cars, and trucks on clean natural gas in order to reduce pollution and help preserve the environment. Siemens, a whole new world of ideas in electronics and electrical engineering. Siemens, precision thinking. And by Canon, quality and innovation for the way we work and live.
In the wet and tangled jungles of Southeast Asia, a 1,000-year-old kingdom struggles to survive. Vietnam, 1971. Some have called Vietnam a war against nature. For 10 years, the United States bombed and used experimental defoliants on a massive scale for the first time in history. But these jungles withstood the assault. They sheltered a country from the machines of war and now must provide for its future. Vietnam is a country both old and young. Its human history stretches deep into the past. It's relying on the hard work and ingenuity of its ancient culture to bring it into the modern world. Cu Chi Province in southern Vietnam, 1991. A farmer is raising fish and ducks in his pond. Like many such ponds in Vietnam, it's a crater, one of the legacies of 25 million bombs. Now farmers are putting these scars of war to good use. They're planting crops in these craters and turning them into thriving ponds. This man still wears the uniform of the Viet Cong, the uniform he wore when his life depended on another kind of hole in the ground. Today he has a job in the Cu Chi tunnels, but 20 years ago he lived in them. These elaborate tunnels included command posts, hospitals, schools, kitchens, a subterranean world that stretched for miles. Villagers learned to live by the slogan, walk without footprints, talk without sound, cook without smoke, become invisible. That is the way to survive. Americans can now explore the tunnels once again, but as tourists, not as soldiers, and with the crater farmer as a guide. The tunnels have attracted their own wildlife: centipedes, whip spiders, frogs, and bats. Today, the bats emerge from their cool, dark passages to one of the last rainforests left in Asia. Despite decades of war, Vietnam's mountain jungles and tropical warmth nurture creatures of delicate beauty. According to legend, the Vietnamese are descended from the magical union of a mountain goddess and a mighty sea god, and they believe their land was an emerald forest of enchantment. Winding south, Vietnam forms the eastern edge of the peninsula of Southeast Asia. The two great centers of commerce and culture are Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, in the south. This is one of the wettest areas in the world. Vietnam's monsoon season lasts 8 months, from May to December. Water runs through the land and the lives of the Vietnamese like a recurring theme. From the eternal cycle of rains comes a wealth of rice and fish. Cuc Phuong National Park in the north has the greatest diversity of animals in the country, home to nearly 60 species of mammals and 200 species of birds. These jungle fowl attracted the attention of ancient Vietnamese, and they were among the first animals to be domesticated. But here, they still roam wild. An agama lizard scampers up a jungle tree. And on the forest floor, a diminutive dragon snuffles through the leaves for ants and termites. It's a pangolin, a mammal whose scaly armor evolved 50 million years ago. At twilight, an elegant forest cat sets out to hunt, the clouded leopard, the rarest leopard in the world. Shy and nocturnal, they spend most of their time in trees, where they're skilled hunters of monkeys and birds. But they also stalk prey on the forest floor. Heavily hunted for their beautiful coats, these leopards may very well vanish before much is known about them. This small piece of undisturbed primal rainforest has survived tens of thousands of years of human activity. It was luck mainly that saw it through the war and government policy that saved it and its giant trees from being cleared afterwards. In 1969, at the height of the war, President Ho Chi Minh declared Cuc Phuong a national park. Perhaps the real irony is that the war was never the biggest threat to this forest. Vietnam has more than 60 ethnic groups. The Hmong, once known as the Montagnards, lived here on the edges of Cuc Phuong. For centuries, they practiced a form of slash-and-burn agriculture, moving from one plot of land to another. As their population grew dramatically in the mid-60s, they pushed farther and farther into the heart of the forest, cutting down trees to plant crops and threatening the park's survival. The Hanoi government gradually persuaded the Hmong to move back to the edges of the forest, where they were introduced to a less destructive type of farming. Officials realized that healthy forests were vital to the nation's economic growth, and the park is now considered a national treasure. Cuc Phuong is also a special place for American Elizabeth Kempf of the Worldwide Fund for Nature. She's written a book about the regreening of Vietnam.
When I first came to this place, I was overwhelmed by its beauty. Trees over 1,000 years old, some over 200 feet tall, create a magical ancient world. The birth of Vietnam's replanting movement began in this tree nursery. Today, there are thousands of such nurseries across the land, many of them planted by children and cared for by old people. The person who inspired the country's environmental movement is my mentor and friend, Professor Vo Quy.
Professor Vo Quy is Dean of Biology at Hanoi University and Vietnam's foremost naturalist. He is also the main architect of the country's National Plan for Environmental Recovery. His home village, Yen Ho in central Vietnam, used to be deep in rainforest before it was bombed during the war.
All of this was thick forest then. The trees were huge and full of birds. To go from here to that temple would have been like an adventure. You could have seen and heard many kinds of birds and insects while you were making that walk. It was a peaceful place. It was where I learned to love nature and wildlife.
After leaving home, Vo Quy became a teacher, the first from his village. Along with teaching, he conducted field research on the region's wildlife.
I found a new species of pheasant here when the forest used to be here. It was the last pheasant ever discovered for science. And when the forest was destroyed, we thought it was extinct.
But the pheasant Vauquois discovered was not extinct. 26 years later, in another forest, it was found again. Now it's called Vauquois pheasant, named in his honor.
We now have 3 pheasants in the Hanoi Zoo, and soon there may be a sanctuary in the wild. This bird is just one of many rare animals in Vietnam. We go to villages and try to teach the people to appreciate what they've got and could lose. Vietnamese do have ingrained feeling for nature. Our biggest festival, Tet, celebrates the best time for planting.
Tet. For many Americans, the word conjures up images of carnage and death. But for the Vietnamese, it is the biggest and happiest holiday, an ancient celebration of the people's deep appreciation for nature. In full bloom, Tet is a feast for the senses. Crowds jam the flower markets of Hanoi, buying peach tree branches and miniature orange trees. This parade honors the sacred animals of Vietnam. Animals both real and mythical dominate the celebrations. The dragon, symbol of nobility and natural energy. The phoenix, bird of peace, an important symbol of hope and rebirth. Everyone celebrates this week-long festival of the Lunar New Year. The high point has always been the fireworks, thought to drive away evil spirits, unhappiness, and misfortune. But in 1968, this Vietnamese film footage documented a different kind of Tet. The Viet Cong chose this special holiday to launch its major offensive of the war, catching the U.S. forces off guard. The Viet Cong moved south, using elephants to march through the rainforests. The cover of the forest canopy proved so effective that the U.S. responded with a massive defoliation program.
The B-52 strategic bomber has been extremely effective in area bombing with conventional munitions. B-52 sorties are flown almost daily against enemy troop concentrations and supply buildups in unpopulated areas, providing the greatest concentration of massed firepower in the history of warfare.
Different kinds of defoliants were employed, but the most notorious was Agent Orange. 20 million gallons of herbicide were dumped from U.S. aircraft, showering down on people and wildlife. Whole forests were turned into wastelands. On the ground, especially along the supply line to the south, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the U.S. Army deployed a special tractor called the Rome Plow. It was designed to cut down and pull out all vegetation in its path. By the end of the war, 1/5 of Vietnam's forest cover was destroyed, but the U.S. forces never succeeded in blocking the ever-shifting Ho Chi Minh Trail. The trail survived, but the water, the soil, the trees, the crops, and the people all suffered from the crippling effects of defoliants. Nearly 25 years later, the South still has high levels of dioxins in its soil, its wildlife, and its people. Everyone has heard of Agent Orange, but another mixture that was sprayed was Agent Blue. Orange was meant for forests, blue for crops. Agent Blue's active ingredient was arsenic, and it killed plants by drying them out. In an effort to deprive the Viet Cong of food, the U.S. sprayed Agent Blue over almost 1 million acres of South Vietnamese farmlands. More than 500,000 people lost a year's supply of food crops. Today, some of those contaminated fields yield a new harvest. But for many years, the soil was infertile, and valuable forests and wetlands had to be cleared and drained to plant enough rice to feed the nation. The elephant was another victim of the war. Elephants became military targets because they were used for transportation by the Viet Cong. In an ongoing effort to rebuild the elephant population and preserve the land from encroaching development, Vo Quy and Elizabeth Kempf traveled to the northern mountains near the coast to inspect a new wild elephant reserve. New reserves and tree planting programs are helping to restore the country, but at the same time, this is happening.
A lot of Vietnamese forests were destroyed by the war, and now they're being destroyed by the population explosion. We have nearly 70 million people today. They have to live. They need timber for building and for fuel. They need land for farming. So the forests continue to be cut down. We are killing our nature for our living.
But forests and wetlands aren't the only things being destroyed. Vietnam's wildlife is also under attack. Sun bears, their organs have been ground into medicine and their exteriors contorted to live up to tourist expectations of fierce wild animals. This booming market in Ho Chi Minh City is draining Vietnam of some of the rarest animals in the world. In Japan, a clouded leopard coat sells for about $80,000. A tourist might pay almost $1,000 for a snarling stuffed monkey. And this exploitation is not limited to dead animals. Gibbons are bought as pets. Otters are sold to zoos. A muntjac deer and a sun bear cub languish in their cages. The animal traders live by their stalls. They work hard and have few other ways to earn an income. All kinds of exotic animals are for sale, parrots and their chicks, monitor lizards, even pelicans are for sale. Pythons, a delicacy here, are sold like rope by the foot. And the greatest prize, the clouded leopard. This array of extraordinary wildlife is some of Vietnam's last. Many of these animals exist no place else, and if the market continues, they will disappear forever. Yet merely 150 miles away from here is Nam Cat Tien, a reserve for some of the rarest and most spectacular species in the world. These tall grasses are a perfect hiding place for tigers. And animals aren't the only danger here. This year alone, 2 park superintendents have died from malaria. Vo Quy and Elizabeth Kempf survey the area and videotape its wildlife, not knowing what they'll find. A bronze-winged jacana, a lily walker. Though it's not rare, it is a beautiful bird. Its extremely long toes and claws enable it to walk easily on floating vegetation.
All over the world, people are destroying wetlands, draining them for farming or construction. They think of them as useless swamps. But in Vietnam, one of the poorest countries in the world, they are protecting them both for people and wildlife. So far, the government has created 25 wetland reserves. Instead of converting these swamps into rice paddies, the people are trying to save some of the world's most endangered species. During the war, this swamp and most of Nam Cat Tien National Park were sprayed by herbicides. That's why, in 1990, Professor Vo Quy and his colleague Professor Nguyen were overjoyed when the white-winged wood duck was rediscovered in this very place.
The white-winged wood duck has suffered all the modern tribulations: overhunting, pollution poisoning, and loss of habitat to agriculture. It needs a flooded forest with lots of hollow trees to nest in. In spite of expensive efforts to protect the bird and to get it to breed in captivity, its world population is only about 400. Calling to her chicks, this female brings a new generation, one by one, out into the world. Concolor gibbons swing through the trees of Nam Cat Tien Reserve. And there are these magnificent creatures. The Duke Langur. This beautiful doe-eyed monkey has been found only in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and was rare even before the region's wars began. They are leaf eaters, and during the war, Agent Orange showered down on their leaves and blossoms. Now these rare monkeys are rapidly disappearing because villagers are cutting down their habitat and killing them for meat. Nam Cat Tien Reserve is truly a place of many wonders, but no one, not even Vo Quy, expected to find one of the world's rarest large animals inside the park. News of an exciting find has reached park headquarters.
We'd heard reports of something like this during the war. Then in 1988, we got more reports, and they turned out to be Javan rhinos. Now we have posters urging people to help us protect them. My colleague Nan Kier took some bones of one that had been killed to Hanoi and reconstructed the skeleton. Soon after, we organized an expedition and found the footprints of 10 to 15 animals. There are only 50 of them left in Java, but now we know there are some in Vietnam, and we are trying to get Nam Cat Tien declared an international reserve. This is urgent because they are being shot at a rate of about one a year, and it is also possible that the waters where they live could become overrun by people.
The lowlands of Vietnam are heavily populated, especially the rich Mekong Delta. The great Mekong River flows down from the Himalayas. When it reaches Vietnam, it branches off many times, spreading out to meet the warm, salty waters of the South China Sea. During the war, the Viet Cong used the swamps of the Mekong Delta as a cover for clandestine operations. The delta became a target for the U.S. military. Villages were destroyed along with crops and wildlife. Fish floated lifeless in these poisoned waters. But today, the Mekong Delta is making a comeback. Rice can now be grown year-round, and the Delta is resuming its status as the breadbasket of Southeast Asia. Surplus rice is sent to more troubled areas of Vietnam, where there are still food shortages. The labor-intensive process of irrigation and rice cultivation has gone unchanged for centuries. With these simple techniques, Vietnam has actually become the third largest exporter of rice in the world. In the Mekong Delta, the distinctions between land and water seem to disappear, and two worlds blend into one. A field of rice is also a pool of fish, where a farmer can reap a double harvest. Virtually every drop of water is sifted in some way. But fish populations that were decimated during the war are now burdened with the pressures of overfishing, and the catch is despairingly small. The nets grow bigger, but the catch does not. Yet there is peace. And with regreening comes the hope of prosperity. Ingenuity and hard work are paying off in the Mekong. The delta is flushed by waters from the sea, washing toxic chemicals out of this productive ecosystem. Recovery here is progressing faster than in the slow-growing forest. The increasing productivity of the delta is also good for birds. Egrets and ibis have come back to the rice paddies to stalk fish and crustaceans. And an even greater blessing has returned to Vietnam: cranes. A symbol of fidelity, longevity, and good luck, the eastern Sarus crane is the bird sent from heaven to fetch those destined for eternal life. They have returned to Trom Chem, a small wild area inland on the Mekong River near the Cambodian border. Its name means bird swamp, but when the war came, the birds vanished. The cranes need natural wetlands. Trom Chem had been their last refuge in a region where rice cultivation had replaced their habitat. But the Viet Cong also used Trom Chem as a refuge, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers set out to drain these wetlands. Great channels were dug to divert the water. Napalm was sprayed to destroy the vegetation. The cranes, it was thought, had become extinct. After the war, the Vietnamese built dikes to reclaim the land for farming, but the soil was acidified and infertile. The land reverted to reeds while the poisons drained away. And then, like a miracle, the cranes came back. There are now more than 1,000. The reappearance of the cranes represents hope for the future. And here at Trom Chem, an international crane reserve has been established. Crane conservation has been a cause that has crossed boundaries as readily as the birds themselves. The Though some countries may not have political, diplomatic, or trade relations with the communist government of Vietnam, there is an international coalition which works to improve conditions inside the country, both for the people and the environment.
We still desperately need international assistance. With wars and population growth, we've lost half our forest cover since 1940. We've got 90 reserves of various kinds and several single-species programs like this one. But our government needs money from rice exports, and that means using pesticides. These harm fish and helpful insects like the dragonflies. Pesticides can poison grains too.
By the end of the war, 13 million tons of bombs had been dropped. 20 million gallons of herbicide had been sprayed. 5 million acres of forest had been destroyed or damaged. In the Mekong Delta, there used to be more than 700,000 acres of coastal mangrove swamps. These mangrove forests were the most seriously damaged ecosystem in Vietnam. In some places, more than 50% of the productive woodland and fisheries were destroyed completely. 20 years later, these coastal forests are being slowly reclaimed, due primarily to the efforts of local people. The Vien Ton Bird Reserve is a small project, only about 100 acres, and it's administered by a village committee. They've been working together since 1975, replanting nesting trees, digging ponds and channels, and generally doing anything that would encourage the birds to return. And the birds are responding. 25 species are here now, in a place that until recently had hardly any life at all. The channels serve as wading pools where egrets and herons can stalk for fish. Mudskippers slide between the pools. Life is being coaxed back. Planted beside the channels are palms and fruit trees. Mangrove forests could take more than 50 years to regenerate, so faster growing plants are sown to add nutrients to the soil. Before the war, there were mangrove forests here in the north, too. As in the south, they are being slowly replanted, and birds are returning. It will take decades for the forest to mature, but in the meantime, the mudflats support their own life. Each kind of bird that comes here uses the mudflats in its own way. A sandpiper's beak is designed to go in straight and deep. A ringed plover skims the surface with its feet. People, too, make a living on these mudflats. Even children work hard to make the land productive. Here in Zan Thuy on the northern coast, the government has set up many collective farms in an effort to stem the rising tide of poverty. The harvest is shrimp to eat and to export. Exports earn desperately needed foreign exchange, and the pressure's on to produce. The entire community comes together to dig new channels to expand the shrimp farms. With ever more mouths to feed, these people are caught in a dilemma, trading their natural wetlands for hard currency. Yet right beside the new shrimp farm, the villagers are also building a scientific research station under the guidance of Professor Vo Quy. It will monitor the recovery of the wetlands and the wildlife. It's the villagers' contribution to Zan Thuy Reserve, the only wetland in Southeast Asia that's listed under the International Wetland Conservation Treaty. Its symbol is the black-faced spoonbill, a bird even rarer than the eastern Sarus crane. Its survival is almost as miraculous as the Javan rhinos. There are only a couple of hundred left in the world. Though protected, their future is not secure, because their migration route from Zan Thuy to North Korea takes them along an ever more populated coast. Vietnam is not only a country of farmers and river fishermen, it's also a country of seafarers. And among its deepest traditions is a profound reverence for whales and dolphins. Temples have been built to honor them. One Vietnamese emperor so revered them that he decreed whales and dolphins to be the equals of princes. If a dolphin dies in a fishing net, the fisherman is responsible for giving it a princely burial. Its bones are placed on an altar and incense is offered to its soul. These fishermen work some of the finest beaches in the world, and sooner or later, their beauty is bound to attract tourism. Yet another pressure on Vietnam's recovering resources. These spectacular limestone formations are the Cat Ba Islands, found along the northern coast. The huge rock islets are made of dolomite. Rain and underground streams have eroded them into bizarrely sculpted shapes and caverns. The islands are believed to be the lair of spirits. In ancient times, fishermen reported seeing dragons in these waters. Some of these islands are part of a national park, home to nearly 200 species of birds, amphibians, wildcats, monkeys, and gibbons. The park also contains 620 species of plants, including some rare trees. But the once clear waters of the bay are now beginning to suffer from the modern threats of pollution and overfishing. While rich in beauty and wildlife, this is also one of the poorest areas in the country. Poverty is sometimes the greatest obstacle to conservation. A park warden sees 3 boats and flags them down.
Hey! Lại đây! Lại mau lên!
They are loaded with firewood. The men have been on one of the islands for 2 days and nights, cutting. This is illegal.
Chúng tôi lấy ở đằng kia. Chúng tôi tưởng là chúng tôi cần đồ nấu nướng. Tôi nấu có tính biết là trái luật. Đây là tài sản của nhà nước. Các anh ăn cắp tài sản của nhà nước và phá hoại tài sản quốc gia.
The firewood is taken away. And sadly, the boats are taken away too. These men took a big risk and lost everything. Resentment against a conservation program may only increase pressure against conservation itself. The people are cutting down huge areas of forest each year for export to Thailand and Japan. And although exporting timber is illegal, no one is flagging down this boat. The loss of trees allows massive soil erosion. An estimated 100 to 200 million tons of topsoil are lost annually. As the dioxins from the war are slowly leached from the land, new toxins are being introduced into the fields, insecticides for the rice crop. They have the potential to kill fish, birds, and dragonflies. With fewer dragonflies, more mosquito larvae survive, mosquitoes that are resistant to spraying. The result is a new wave of malaria. And just as the last of the Agent Orange is washing away, the new poisons are collecting in the water. Some of the land remains dead. The wounds of war are agonizingly slow to heal. As the country struggles to restore its natural resources, it must contend with the larger problems of development and of the need to feed its people. In many ways, these will prove to be the greatest challenges to the country's survival. The painful legacy of the war in Vietnam may never fade completely. But at long last, Vietnam, the country, the lush, green, and living country, is reclaiming Vietnam, the war.
Nature is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Siemens, a whole new world of ideas in electronics and electrical engineering. Siemens, precision thinking. And by Canon, quality and innovation for the way we work and live. And by the gas industry, helping provide cleaner air with clean gas energy.
This is PBS.